Welcome, everybody. Appreciate you attending our webinar today. The topic is wearable technology a worthy investment for you? My name is Steve Simon. I'm a Senior Risk Control Manager here at Safety National, and we definitely appreciate you taking some time today and going through the presentation. Just a couple housekeeping items that I want to address with you. Any questions that you have throughout the presentation, feel free to put that in the questions panel. If you're not sure, and you have any questions about how to get your questions submitted, or you need some help with any troubleshooting, just put that in the questions panel as well, and our team will be glad to help you. In addition, you will also notice we have two handouts that you can download at any time during the presentation. One is a comparison matrix of the wearable technology vendors and providers. We've done quite a bit of research, and I think you would find it very helpful. We'll be touching and going through a little bit of that during the webinar, and also a resource handout. This will actually give you links to the wearable technology vendors and providers that are out there, along with some research articles and articles that we have written on wearable technology. I will mention and also remind you at the end of the presentation, if you go to our website, safetynational.com, there'll be an opportunity for you to sign up, take a look at our carrier chronicles that have a lot more information, various other topics, including more on wearable technology. And if you do sign up, you'll will receive the bi-monthly email. Okay. And you will get a copy of this. Everyone that is registered will get a copy within 48 hours in your email. The objectives today, I want to talk just a little bit about, not spend too much time, a little bit of the history, a little bit of an overview of what's going on with wearable technology. Many of you know it has really evolved into the workplace, especially the last several years. Probably many of you have seen it post-pandemic. You have started to attend conferences and maybe even have spoke with some of the wearable technology vendors that have been out there, and want to just talk as well about the type of wearable technologies that are in the workplace, along with potential benefits of wearables, and then also going into some of the challenges. So just a little bit of the pros and the cons around implementation, and a couple insights as well that everyone should be aware of if it's something that you're thinking about piloting and moving forward on. We're going to talk about that and some best practices that could be very helpful. I know there's a lot of interest around the cost and investment around wearable technology, so we'll do our best to try to provide some parameters and share a little bit of information, at least what we've learned. And then I do want to just talk also a little bit about some of the emerging technology around the ergonomic applications that are out there. And some of you might know what I might be referring to, but we'll get into it in the presentation. And this is definitely a great alternative for those organizations that may not be ready to invest in wearable technology. And then I want to excuse me, then I want to wrap up the presentation with some research and validation on the wearable technology. I think the science is very important, and just kind of provide you with some information so you're aware about what type of research has been completed. We know the wearable market is really growing rapidly. Technology's changing. Wearable technology, it could be dated back to the year 1286 when they started experimenting with different types of wearable glasses. Um, I'd say probably in 1975 is when we were most enamored with the watch calculator. For those of you who were born before that or right around that time period, you'll know what I'm kind of referring to. 5 years later, um, we were even more impressed with the Sony Walkman when that came out. 10 years after that, we started getting into wearable wireless webcams. And then I'd say in the year 2009, 2010, most of us have started to really get into the activity trackers, the Fitbit. And then 5 years later after that, the Apple Watch came out. And I'd say between 2006, 2013 has really been the era of when we all started kind of taking notice of the wearable technology market. As you could see on the screen here, the market continues to grow. It's an unbelievable market right now, $61.3 billion dollars, and it's expected to kind of grow from there upwards into 2030. There's really, 533 million total wearable devices out there that shipped out in 2021. And many of the wearable technology providers and vendors out there did their best to adapt during the pandemic. And I'll talk a little bit about how some of that technology has evolved. Most of you most of you may be familiar with the more common type of wearable technology out there, which is the inertial measurement unit sensors. These are wearable sensors. This is what you typically, most of you may see when you attend conferences or you speak to some of the wearable technology vendors out there. There's a very strong focus on manual material handling, monitoring the posture. So many of these vendors are kind of focused a little bit on job tasks, especially around repetitive bending, twisting, pulling, carrying, these kinds of things these types of tasks that definitely can impact, and having the technology record the data. The idea behind it is the artificial intelligence built-in chips that are built into the technology is sensing the movements. And when they first came out on the market, the focus really was to try to change the behavior of the worker and also provide enough data back to the workplace for those individuals who were looking at the dashboards and the data to determine what actions, what steps really need to be completed or changed in the workplace to address manual material handling. So when the wearable sensors really first came out, most of them, not all, but I'd say most had this haptic response. And what this is a vibration, it's a low vibration that really reminded the workers in real time as they were doing it, in terms of the repetitive bending, the twisting, anything to do with posture, just to give them that gentle reminder to help kind of change the behavior of the worker. And the idea really was at the end of the day or at the end of the week, depending on how the organization utilized the data, it was kind of geared to help coach, provide some feedback, implement those corrective actions with workers as well as departments that had a lot of the manual material handling exposure. What many of the wearable technology vendors found is that in itself wasn't enough to really sell every industry on the capabilities of the wearable technology. So it has since evolved, and many of these wearable sensors now not only will still provide the alerts and the data for the lower lumbar support and the posture monitoring, but they have built in other components to address temperature warnings like extreme heat or cold. Lone worker safety was another one. This was something they were looking at during the pandemic in terms of distancing. If everyone was wearing the wearable sensors, it allowed the organization to understand if individual workers were complying with the distancing, and also communication was essentially built into the device, where if someone did have a slip or fall or didn't respond during a period of time, the device would alert someone who's monitoring that dashboard and the technology as it's feeding into the system. Also, same thing, forklift driving. This is a big bilateral collision avoidance. This is something where it will alert the driver that some of these devices have since then been modified to attach to the forklift, as well as other workers. So if I'm walking in close proximity, I'm going to get a vibration to let me know that the forklift is nearby. Same thing with the driver. He'll also be alerted. And some of that could also come not just in the form of vibration, but other audible warning signals and other visual displays that can essentially be set and built in to the wearable technology. It was really a way to kind of expand the wearable technology market and to make it a little bit more user-friendly and try to incorporate other industries and allow organizations to get the most out of the wearable technology. The key, of course, is the more workers that utilize this type of wearable sensor comes data. And a lot of data definitely comes in depending on the number of employees, individual workers who are utilizing the wearables technology. And the key here really is how the data is being managed, right? Who's looking at it? How often is it looked at? Most of this is comprised into dashboards. And so that makes it a little bit easier in terms of trying to manage the data. You will, depending on each of the vendors, many of the dashboards might vary slightly, but the concept is generally the same. It allows you to kind of drill down by individual workers, departments, tasks, kind of depending on what the individuals were doing. And then from there, the key is to take actionable steps and to implement those action items. Just to kind of give you a little bit of a visual on the wearable technology and what that kind of looks like. We don't endorse or support any particular wearable technology, but these are some of the more common ones that are out there. This is not an exhaustive list of everything that's there, but some of these maybe you might already be somewhat familiar with or you've seen. These are very small and very compact. And the idea is usually depending on the vendor, some of these are strapped either to the arm, as you could see with MakeYouSafe, some with the module, some prefer, strapping it around the waist, the belt, and some can even be strapped towards the back as well. So it really kind of depends on the vendor. This is continuously evolving as well. The idea around here is to kind of make it small and compact and not really get in the way of the employee or the worker in terms of conducting the job or the task. But these are some of the vendors that are out there. Some of these are on our handout list. So you could certainly contact them, certainly get a little bit more information on each of them. The other side of the wearable technology is the exosuits. This one's a little probably more advanced. This may not pertain to every industry. There's two types of exosuits that are out there. The power hydraulic type, which you see on the upper right-hand column, off to the right on the upper side. This is something that kind of helps support the upper and lower limbs, and does take away a lot of the exertion and strain associated with particular task. And again, I think sometimes with this, the pricing is could be a driving factor, which we'll get into. We'll touch on a little bit. The passive spring-based is more what you see on the bottom. This one typically is usually just a vest, a little bit easier for workers to wear. But instead of having to hold something that's awkward and heavy, like that camera, you could see how it easily just attaches to this vest. It takes a lot of the load off to the lower back, the arms, the shoulder. So it takes a lot of the strain. Most of the exosuits are more closer to the one that you see on the bottom. Most are more passive, spring-based, and the focus really is to identify, to help with the upper extremities. And again, it just really depends on the task. We'll get into a little bit of more of the pros and the cons, but the biggest challenge with the exosuits is that when you take exertion or strain off of one part of the body, it does transfer stress to other parts as well in terms of being able to compensate for what they're trying to do and complete the task. So those are things that we do have to consider, are things you should consider if this is something that you want to pilot. This is just a list of other exosuits. There's a lot of different vendors out there. Some of these vendors are some of our universities that have worked to partner with organizations around the research. I would say there's a little bit more research around the exosuits than there are around the wearable sensors. Wearable sensors are a little bit new, say in the last 5+ years or so. The exosuits have been around a little bit longer. I would say that there is more opportunity around the exosuits for universities. It's more, it's something that universities definitely want to get into a little bit more. Not to say that the wearable sensors aren't an opportunity. I think it's still relatively new. There's a lot of startup companies around the wearable sensors. So some of the research on that, and we'll get into some examples here on the research coming up. But I would say the wearable sensors, you're not going to find too much research out there at the moment, and there's probably reasons for that, and I'll get into that. But I just wanted to at least share with you what these look like, some of the exosuit vendors that are out there. And this is all on our handout list as well, so you can definitely explore and preview and contact some of these vendors as well. One of the studies, and I tried to find ones that at least were not too old, at least ones that were a little bit more on the recent side, the last 5 years or so. This one is this study here in 2019 took a look at 8 different types of wearable products. These ones were a little bit more focused on uh, different variations of what we would consider the exosuits. Um, and so what came out of this, and I'm just kind of giving you a quick synopsis, we don't have time to get into all the details, but the main conclusions were that some of the exertion was reduced, and there was some benefits around that. But as some of the employees compensated, some of the stress was um, uh, some of the stress around the exertion was located at other parts of the body, so that increased overall feedback from the workers. Some liked it, some didn't. Some found that the tasks were a little bit easier, some didn't. Adoption and buy-in, really tough. Difficult, certainly, I would say, with the wearable sensors, to a degree, even probably a little bit more challenging with the exosuits. The exosuits do have some disadvantages for adoption with employees and their buy-in, and we'll get into some of those reasons as we go through just a little bit of the research here, and I think you'll see it. The idea is that we need to be careful, or organizations need to be cautious about what they're piloting to make sure they're not bringing on more cumulative trauma or other MSD type of risk factors as some of the stress does get transferred to other parts of the body. This was another study done in 2019 where they looked more at the vest, the exosuit. This one's called ESCO vest, and there was 100 employees in this group over 8 plants. Most of the feedback was pretty positive from the workers, but 6 months into the study, you can see some of the issues or concerns that the workers reported. A lot of thermal discomfort. These vests, have since evolved, and it may continue to evolve as technology evolves. But the thermal discomfort, is definitely a factor. Range of motion, it does restrict certain parts of the body in terms of being able to conduct the task. Workers found that a little bit challenging. And the fit and the adjustability was another factor. Even though they do come in different sizes, it was still a factor for some. And for 9% of the workers, the weight of the vest. These vests are not always light. It does add slight, I would say not a ton, but there is some weight that is added to the vest, especially if you're attaching other tools and things that we saw with the camera that can be uncomfortable for some workers. There's no question about it that there are benefits associated with the exosuits. It can help to a degree increase some performance. There are some adverse effects, as we mentioned, and again, a lot of the impact in terms of sustainability, because these are quite an investment, usually will take longer than 6 months. It could take a couple years before you really kind of see whether this is going to work or it's not going to work. So, as you continue to gather feedback, especially in research studies. This study took a look at, this study, I believe, was in 2020. This study took a look at the upper extremity, especially overhead tasks, which can be very challenging for some workers. This one looked at 27 employees, pretty even split between male and female. Before the study, no one had reported any injuries in the past 12 months. That was very a very important part of the study. I will say that in research studies, they remove a lot of the variables and the focus is strictly on the product itself. And I'm going to be talking about that a little bit when it comes to the wearable sensors, because there's a lot of questions that we'll get into, but there's a lot of, I'd say, information that is out there in terms of claim reduction or percentage of reduction if these wearable sensors or wearable technology are utilized. And I promise I'll touch on that. But back to this study, the shoulder range of motion was reduced by 10%. Same thing with postural. Again, there's always the risk of slip and fall, especially when you are wearing, you know, a wearable technology vest. But usually they're pretty minimal. And the biggest benefit, I would say, is the lower lumbar support, spine loading. That was reduced by 30%. So there are some benefits. Really, again, I think it depends on the task itself. Most, you know, and this is, you know, again, this is just what most of the vendors or providers are, wearable technology vendors out there. They're trying to target more of the distribution centers, manufacturing. They're starting to get into a little bit of retail. Not to say other industries can't benefit or utilize this, but the ones that typically are starting to use a little bit more of it are your distribution centers and warehousing. I want to just talk a little bit about the emerging technology around the ergonomic applications, because this is a fantastic alternative for those organizations who are not ready or who prefer not to make the investment in the wearable technology space. Many of you probably already know that the two main ones on the market are Tumiki Ergonomics and Velocity EHS. They have this software. And what this is it's an application that goes on your phones, and it allows you to upload a video of the task, and the program itself does all the analysis. This has typically been traditionally done by an ergonomist or an ergonomic specialist coming on site, evaluating, observing, taking measurements, putting the report together. So this is, again, some real-time data that can come out of this task, can help quantify risk. A lot of the ergonomic methods and tools out there, like the REBA, the RULA, which are rapid upper limb assessments, rapid entire body assessments, including the strain index for exertion, and many other methods that ergonomists typically use, are essentially built in to the software. And it's really running that program autonomously and giving you the results of what typically would be done traditionally by hand or by having ergonomists come out. Not to say that there isn't benefit. I'm a big believer in still having the ergonomist come out and help with action items or recommendations and so forth. This really doesn't take the place of that, but it's a fantastic opportunity for those committee members, those safety professionals, others, even risk control, loss control consultants, going out and conducting these types of assessment and giving some feedback. Many of these methods and tools that are built in to the program are highly validated, have been researched, and of course, the biggest plus is the cost around there. You'll see really it's a pretty simple, straightforward process. You know, most of us have cameras on our phone. It allows us to easily upload the task, and then the dashboard will essentially allow you to look at the data and determine whether it's on the higher risk and whether action or actionable items need to be taken. But it's again a fantastic way to easily analyze, get those reports, of that information out quickly and easily without having to spend a lot of time doing this manually. There's been a lot of questions on the cost and the investment. What does it look like? What can I expect to spend? And again, this is talking to about a dozen or so providers out there. I will tell you these are approximate costs. These are not exact costs, but at least it'll give you an idea of what we're talking about and what you can typically expect during either a pilot stage or a full rollout. The sensors, again, this is give or take. There's ones out there that might be slightly less, slightly more. Again, this is just a very rough range. Most of the vendors, the wearable technology vendors, are open to a pilot stage. This is something would be a good starting point if it's something you want to consider. There are many of the vendors, not all, but many of them have minimum order requirements. So there is some initial investment up front. What's not included in this price is on-site support. So if you want the vendor to come out or a specialist to come out to help implement or roll that out, there's additional costs on top of what you're typically seeing. Some can kind of walk you through it on your own, and it's straightforward. Again, many of the vendors don't really want to stop at the pilot stage. It's more profitable for them to kind of work towards the full rollout, and there's heavier investment involved for organizations when you're talking full rollouts of entire plants or multiple locations or multiple plants. So it's something that you need to look at carefully with a lot of caution. As you could see all the way to the right, the artificial intelligence, the ergonomic applications, these, as we talked about, are definitely more cost effective. You can expect, to pay anywhere from maybe 6,000 to 10,000, roughly, give or take, depending if you did it annually versus monthly, to have access to the ergonomic applications. There may be other risk control or loss control professionals who you may be partnering with that have that technology, and if that's the case, fantastic. But for those that want their own and prefer to do it, you could see much more reasonable and might be a better starting point for some organizations rather than starting with the sensors. As we go into the benefits, as we kind of talked about, the real-time data is the biggest plus here. Having, it's a little different than claim data, which is reactive, right? Waiting for something to happen, and then we kind of look at the trend. Here we can get data right away. We can look at it again daily, every couple of days, every week, and this is before claims or injuries will typically take place. Again, it could help build based on the data, if that's what the organization needs to kind of help build, a business case. But especially being able to identify critical areas, departments, trends, patterns ahead of time. That's the biggest pro here. It's giving you that data and making the analysis easy. And instead of having to send teams out or bring, not to say there isn't benefit of having safety professionals or loss or risk control consultants come out on site, there definitely is. But again, on a day-to-day basis, looking at that risk analysis and that evaluation, trying to manage the data and getting that data, that's the key. Some will even go as far as kind of looking at helping to implement and enhance their employee wellness programs, because it will do other tracking, as we talked about, especially with steps and movement and things like that. So those are the general, again, this is not an exhaustive list of every type of advantage out there, but these are the main ones that you can typically expect Certainly, you may not see this in the pilot stage. You may see this more as you work towards a full rollout. The disadvantages, again, as some of you might be thinking about, or as we mentioned, the haptic feedback and the vibration, this is going to be challenging for workers. Not every worker wants to have that vibration go off every couple of minutes or every couple of seconds. And so adoption of these wearable technologies, especially the sensors, make it very challenging. I'll put it that way. And for some, it may not change the behavior, may frustrate the employee. So having them understand and buy into it up front is really, really key. As we talked about, especially the exosuits, the range of motion, the comfort, again, are key factors. The adoption, even a little bit more challenging because there has been some research out there on these exosuits. And so you kind of know what to have to work, you know what to look for up front, and getting a pilot stage going with some employees and letting them know what the expectations are and what to expect is very key. Data security and privacy, big factor for those organizations that have been surveyed. This seems to be the #1 issue with employees, believe it or not. They're very concerned about how the data is going to be utilized, the privacy of that data. So I think the key here is working with IT, ramping up your data security, and just kind of ensuring, even though, yeah, some of this isn't medical, but it is still data for individual employees. And employees don't want that to be used in other ways against them in any fashion. So I think trying to understand and working through this up front is definitely a key. Again, how much of the data do you trust? Again, you know, these technologies, as we know, and these sensors, they're constantly evolving, and data is data, but it's not, again, it's not the same as getting employee feedback on the job itself. So again, it really goes hand in hand. I think this is when we think about wearable technology, it's a component of your health and safety program. It's a component or a part of your ergonomic program. It's not the magic cure. It's not something that should be a standalone. It should be part of a formal program. And then again, what action is going to be taken from this data? So it's a lot of investment, even in the pilot and then the full rollout, to go through, but not to take the action or not to have senior management buy-in, which is also very critical to support any of the actionable items that need to take place as a result. Otherwise, employees start to lose faith. And again, the culture starts to shift. And then for those that are not using it correctly, it's more of a focus on the employees than it is the system, the process, the workplace design, the equipment, the training, everything that goes along with a health and safety program, a good ergonomic program. Those are just things to kind of think through before organizations jump into something like wearable technology. For most, there's a significant financial investment as well as time management requirements to manage the data. So again, looking at your health and safety professionals, looking at committees, is this something they have time for? How often will you be looking at it? Do you have formal programs? Is senior management, do they have the financial budgets and commitments set aside for the investment when you're looking at the rollout? All that has to be seriously considered to have success around the wearable technology. Uh, Getting back into the conclusions of the research studies, most vendors have case studies. Now, I will caution you that case studies are not research studies. Case studies are some of the largest clients that have had success. And that doesn't translate into the success that you may have for your industry or your organization. A lot of vendors say if you use the device, you could see a 30% reduction in claims. You see a 50% reduction in claims. I would be very cautious and careful as you look at that information and how they achieved those numbers, because there's not a lot of research around the sensors to determine how they got that type of reduction. You know, a few isolated cases or case studies is certainly not a representation of all industries and every organization. And again, you know, depending on the success, maybe a pocket of success they had, you know, in those organizations, again, may not represent a true research study that removes the variables like any implementation of new equipment, training, employee feedback, ergonomic committees, and support, and just focuses on the equipment, the wearable device itself, to determine how much of that is driving improvement or not. And so there's definitely more research and validation that is needed, especially around the sensors. But again, there's a big push on the market right now, as many of you probably have seen again at these conferences, to give it a try and to pilot, and they're trying to work on the price point to try to make it attractive to at least get started on a smaller pilot. Again, these are all conclusions for you to determine whether you think it's a right fit or not. The exosuits, again, they've been around a little bit longer. There's no question there's positive results from these exosuits, and it can reduce exertion, especially around the overhead work. But again, you know, adoption, you know, discomfort, adoption of, you know, having the employees buy into it are definitely a key. The more you put on the full suit, the more you start to be concerned about falls, balance, space that is needed. And unfortunately, and again, this is still evolving, when you take stress off of one part of the body, it does typically get transferred to another part. And then you have to ask yourself, are we creating other issues or concerns or other hazards as a result of that? So that has to be monitored. Again, it's evolving. You know, there's more research that definitely needs to happen and occur with the exosuits as well. Just some overall final thoughts, and then we can get into questions. The biggest, I would say, the most important conclusion here really is the financial and the time commitments needed for long-term success. Those are critical factors. You can't really get around that. Again, it may not be that much in the pilot stage, but then when you work towards the full rollout, it could get a little bit more challenging. So being able to address those up front, I think, are important in terms of whether you're going to work towards a pilot or not. Developing formal written programs. Again, those that are successful, that have had some success, have those formalities in place. Ergonomic programs designed embedded into the organization. Health and safety. I'm not talking about just, you know, policies and procedures. I'm talking about actual programs, roles, responsibilities, how things are going to be managed, when things are going to be implemented, how that works, getting employee feedback. All those are important factors. But those that have had some success are ones that tend to have better safety climates, safety cultures, that understand, that get employees to buy in upfront very early, and share this information with employees in terms of what the thoughts are before the pilot stages actually begin. Having their acceptance and buy-in, since they're the ones who are going to be utilizing the wearable technology, absolutely critical for success. Can't stress it enough. Very important. And so if you don't feel like the safety climate is just right, or certain departments, either with management or employees, then this may not be the right fit. So it's just something to kind of think through, especially as you typically would pilot this maybe with a few departments or one or two departments to start with. So those are just things to be aware of. Just trying to make sure you understand, organizations understand the benefits and the disadvantages, the pros and the cons before any final decision. Thinking it through is important because there is an investment. Again, there's alternatives with the ergonomic applications, and this is something that could be very helpful. It could be a starting point or a springboard towards looking to move towards a pilot on the wearable technology side, whether it be the sensors or the exosuits. Some prefer to start with the ergonomic applications, and that just might seem a better fit, not just from a financial and time commitment, but for what the organization can handle currently. I think we'll keep the remaining time open for any questions. If you don't have any questions, that's fine. If you do think of questions, you could still feel free to send them in, and we'll address some of these questions in our Carrier Chronicles. Oh, here's some. Okay. Let me see if I can get to the questions. Okay. Are there any concerns by employees about privacy, especially with the tracking applications? I would say for those employees, for those organizations where employees are surveyed, absolutely, privacy is a big factor. It seems to be a big factor for employees. They seem very, very concerned about the privacy, especially tracking and how the data is going to be utilized. I've only seen one, just seen that one question. Yeah, I'm scrolling, I'm not seeing the questions.
Hi, Steve. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Hi, I'll go through a couple of the questions that I got for you because
Okay,
we have several that came in.
sure.
We had Tina, she asked if you're seeing any lawsuits against wearable tech, and if so, are there any rulings one way or another that you would want to mention?
Yeah, I'm not sure, that's a tough to answer because every organization in terms of what they want to share, I wouldn't say that there's losses or claims. as a result, I would say it's more focused on organizations are more focused on reducing the existing claims that are currently already in place. I wouldn't say that the claims increase. I wouldn't say, for the most part, those organizations that have implemented it are seeing an increase in losses. It's more focused on, is there a reduction in the existing losses around manual material handling or repetitive motion? And that really varies from every organization. It varies depending on what they're seeing in the pilot versus the full rollout. It depends on what type of sensor they're using. It depends on whether they're using the exosuit. So that one's a little bit more challenging, but I wouldn't say that organizations are seeing any increase around losses associated with that.
We had Benjamin ask if there was any data that construction companies are using wearables, and do the wearables stand up to extreme working conditions?
Yeah, so this is probably a better question for each of the vendors per se in terms of their products standing up, in certain, outdoor. But wearables, big industry, construction has really taken off. I'm glad you brought that up. The construction industry is really starting to experiment with a lot of the wearables as well. Several of the case studies that are shared with many of especially the sensors, wearable sensors, do show that there are some benefits. Again, very cautiously here, because it is a case study, that the construction industry is receiving some benefits, I would say, in terms of gathering data up front and utilizing it as more real-time data in terms of changes that they need to make with their employees. But yes, I would say each of the vendors can probably share their own conclusions around what they're particularly seeing with their product more than we can. But I would definitely say, wearable technology is very well enmeshed into that industry.
Right, we had one from Sharon. She was interested in knowing if insurers have begun recognizing the implementation of these programs and recognizing by way of premium credits.
Yeah, I'm not sure insurance carriers are, I can't speak for all the insurance carriers out there, but most aren't really looking to give any premium credits as a result. I think the best way to think of wearable technology, it's a tool. It's just one more resource for the health and safety team to manage risk, right? It may be no different than changing out a piece of equipment or implementing an ergonomic program or a different strategy to help with losses, help with claims, reduce risk. I think that's really the key here. Again, I don't think you're going to see big changes in claim reduction. I think the key with wearable technology, and we've talked about it on the webinar, is getting that real-time data and then what the organization does with that data to implement the changes. But again, hopefully the key is to reduce risk, reduce claims, and overall have better outcomes. So that in itself can be a plus. But premium credits, not something I've seen, certainly with Safety National.
Steve, we had a question from Adam. He wanted to know if we have a recommendation of what losses need to be in order to start looking at these.
Yeah, I think that's going to vary from every organization, depending on the industry, depending on the task. But I think if you're looking for a particular loss cause or loss group, manual material handling and repetitive motion may be the better drivers to start with. If you're seeing an uptick or an increase in the manual material handling, especially with lifting, if you can drill down into your claims, this might be a good starting point for you. That's why it seems to be a little bit more focused on the distributions, the warehousing, where you're going to see a lot of manual material handling. Even though there's a lot that is automated, there is still a portion or a part around distribution and warehousing today that still requires some manual tasks.
Okay, we have a few more. Um, uh, we had one from Carol. Are there studies evaluating wearable use as a worker rehab aid, presuming physician signs off as part of a return to work plan?
Um, I don't think from the wearable technology sensors and the exosuits, these vendors, that's what they're promoting. That probably is kind of best, this I think question is probably best suited more for the medical community or physicians to kind of answer from their perspective. But I will tell you from the perspective of the vendors out there, this is not what they're marketing for organizations. It's not going to be on the return to work side. They're trying to market more on the prevention side before a claim occurs. That's really what they want the organizations. But again, even with that, a lot of it is going to be dependent on what the organizations do with the data, right? You get the real-time data, and what actions you take will then help drive and reduce risk. But that's what they're focused on. And again, with wearable sensors, there is that focus of trying to change the employee's behavior, which may not be successful in every organization as well. But it would more focus on the prevention side, I would say, from the vendor perspective.
We had a question come from Veronica. She wanted to know if you need ergonomics training background knowledge for using ergo apps, and would it be suitable for use by line supervisors to use?
Yeah, great question. The answer is no, you don't need to be an ergonomic expert or specialist to use the apps. The apps are as simple as uploading the video, and it comes with instructions and lets you build dashboards and reports that help you understand what that data looks like. So again, you don't have to be that ergonomist or that ergo champion to fully understand what all those tools mean. So a lot of the data is summarized very quickly for you in terms of high risk, low risk. And again, items that come back higher risk, I think you can expect that may see more claims. Those that come back lower risk for claims or injuries to occur. And then how fast or quickly you need to make those changes. Um, yeah, great question.
I think we got time for one more. We had one come in from Carol. She wanted to know if you've heard of any calibration or maintenance issues from deployed wearables, like earlier extreme conditions.
Yeah, that's another great question. When the wearable sensors first came out and they were focused, and again, this is from a vendor perspective, at least when I spoke with them, when they came out and the focus was just on posture monitoring, the device itself didn't require a lot of calibration. But since it's evolved now and you could grab a sample of like noise or it's monitoring for heat or cold, some of the devices, again, this is changing, calibration does need to be checked periodically. How often? That's really for the vendors to answer rather than myself. But there is some maintenance and calibration that may be required. Not 100% sure on the frequency of that. And again, that's more for the vendors to answer. But they feel confident that those things could be easily resolved and taken care of. That's kind of the support they claim to build in to help you through that. But yeah, great question. I think are we at, I think we're at time, maybe even slightly over. The rest of the questions, apologize if we didn't get a chance to go through them. We will definitely put them into our carrier chronicles, so please be on the lookout for that. We're always adding to our carrier chronicle articles, so you may see a lot of your questions answered during that time. Thank you so much. And again, safetynational.com, feel free to take a look at the website, carrier chronicles. You're welcome to sign up or go on, and you'll see our webinar library as well. And we'll get this posted in about 24 hours. For those that want to go onto the website and take a look. But for those who have registered, you will get a copy of this recording and this entire webinar in the next 48 hours. Thank you very much.